The book of Sirach comes from a section of the Bible known as the wisdom literature, and it's written in order to provide instruction about how to be in right relationship with God, right relationship with others, especially spouse and kids and parents and siblings, the poor, the elderly, the orphan, the widow, and the alien. And so the wisdom literature sets out practical advice about how to keep things level and smooth. The church always chooses this first reading for the feast of this Holy Family. My uncle, I think you know, is a priest, and we as a family, my parents and us kids and my aunts and uncles and the cousins would always go to North Hill, Akron, to Christ the King for this feast, usually the Vigil Mass, and we'd sit there, and eventually after Mass was over, we'd go back to the rectory for dinner. And I think as kids we were amazed by all the cookies. It's probably why I'm a priest, just for the cookies. At any rate, but during Mass we'd sit there in the pews and we'd hear this reading. There's all this jabbing, right? Jabbing and glares and looks. And because, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph may have been a holy family, but my family was not. So we knew how to get under my father's skin. He knew how to grieve us. I remember usually around the holidays, you remember going to Olin Mills for pictures? And that miserable experience. It was always hotter than blazes in Olin Mills, and somebody was always in a bad mood. So it took like many, many retakes before we could get a picture where at least not everybody was, So you live family life too. It's not easy. And so for whatever reason, God chose to send his son Jesus into our world, into a family. Now granted, Mary and Joseph were holy, sinless, but doesn't mean they were perfect. And so in reflecting this week, I was thinking about those 30 years that there really is no mention of Jesus in the Scriptures. For 30 years, he learned to walk and talk, and he learned to watch his mother cook and clean and probably make clothes. And eventually, when he was old enough, he would probably go on with his father to build. They suggest that perhaps he was more of a construction overseer, so he would have learned trades. He would have learned how to watch the farmers in the field. He would have learned how to watch the shepherds tending their flocks. As a good Jew, he would have gone to the synagogue each Saturday for the Sabbath to listen to the Scriptures and listen to the teaching of the scribes, the Pharisees, the elders. He would have observed once a year going up to the temple to offer sacrifice there, the money changers and the sacrifices there at the beautiful place of worship with God Almighty. He would have learned to watch how people would have put offerings into the treasury, some making a lot of noise and some making just a few small clinks. He would have learned how the social order made some people more important than others. He would have watched how the Romans oppressed his people, pressed them into slavery and service. He would have seen what it was like for fishermen to go out on the Sea of Galilee to gather in a day's catch to provide for their families. Again, for those 30 years, I think he had his eyes and his ears open and his mouth shut. And those 30 years of formation prepared him for those 3 years of public ministry where he put all that experience and observation into practice as he told parables that turned everything upside down, saying that God's kingdom is not like this world. And so on this Feast of the Holy Family, I invite you to think about how your families formed you. Oftentimes, how mom and dad love each other really sets the tone for the family. I've watched my own siblings. I won't say who was who, but my one brother and his wife, my goodness, they can cast glances. And all of a sudden, the machine began to twirl. And I thought, wow, they could get their kids together in a good 10, 15 minutes, get everything loaded in the car and out the door. The other one, it was like, dragging buckets around of sand. I've watched how well they discipline kids. I remember once my brother says, I took away his videos for a week. And I said, you just punished your wife. That's how she gets work done during the week, the videos. So I've watched the family. I've watched how they keep their house clean. I remember one family, if the thing hit the floor, it was gone to the garbage. The other family, those kids would dig in the couch cushions, and it was like bonus food, But I think all families are different, and yet this feast invites us to be a little kinder, a little bit more gentle, more generous, thinking of the others well ahead of ourselves. There's a woman, Dr. Jennifer Thomas. She puts out, it's called The 5 Languages of Apology. It's like a weekly newsletter. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the 5 languages of love, right? So this is the 5 languages of apology. And she says that we tend to prefer to receive apologies in certain ways. So it's great to hear somebody say, I'm sorry. That's a great first step. But as any wife would tell you, she might ask her husband, what are you sorry for? And he might be difficult for him to produce an answer. So sometimes I'm sorry for doing X, Y, or Z, or not doing. Sometimes I'm sorry for, and this is how I am going to make it right. Or another one, I'm sorry for, and this is how I'm going to learn from this error and prevent it to the best of my ability from happening again, right? So, and there's a 5th one, I can't remember what it is. But she says, it's important when we offend or hurt or neglect to actually say we're sorry. And that's one of the things I always include in the marriage homily. I'm not worried about the young couple who's young and in love. I'm not worried. I'm worried about everybody else in the assembly for the wedding that day, because I know they're deep in the trenches, and there's probably something that happened that morning that deserves an apology, and that also deserves an expression of I love you and forgive you, because none of us is perfect, and we're all sinful and flawed, and we're going to hurt each other in families. It's kind of like that's what happens, and yet it's precisely in the family that we learn to ask forgiveness. And we experience mercy. And that's a beautiful thing. Oftentimes in the confessional, when somebody confesses their sin, I'll ask, hey, did you apologize to your spouse, your kids, your parents? And some, oh yeah. And I said, well, do they forgive you? Oh yes. I said, well, you're very lucky then. You're very lucky. Sometimes I go, well, kind of. I'm like, what's kind of mean? Like, did you say you're sorry or not? Well, they know. I'm like, no, they don't. They don't know. It's important for you to say you're sorry. So, again, as we celebrate this Feast of the Holy Family, I invite you to take a look into your family history, your relationships. Is there a place you need to go back and say you're sorry? Or is there a place you need to let go of a hurt that somebody inflicted upon you? And if you're not able to get through it by yourself, maybe it's time to go call up a counselor and go see a therapist to begin to work through those hurts that you've been dragging around for decades. For sure, the Lord wants us to grow in maturity, in faith, hope, love in the context of a family. And like I said, none of them are perfect. Probably most are dysfunctional in some way, shape, or form. But for whatever reason, God chose to send his son into our world in one of those, into a family. And he learned probably quite a bit from his mom and dad. And so my prayer for us this week is that we are grateful to God for our families, especially the ways they've formed us in love, and that we also are able to take that wisdom of the Colossians letter and really work at striving to live more of a culture of forgiveness and mercy so that hurts might not keep us from growing in love.